There comes a moment quiet, still, when life feels like it's trying to tell you something. It doesn't shout, it doesn't announce itself, but something shifts. You start to sense that the role you once held so firmly, being the rock, the heart of the home, the one they turn to, has somehow faded, not because you changed, but because they did. The very children you once protected with everything you had now feel distant. The warmth hasn't disappeared completely, but there's a chill in the way they talk, the way they look through you instead of at you. Before we go any further, I want to ask you to take a deep breath and settle into this moment with me. If you've ever felt unseen by the very people you raised, you're not alone. Leave a comment below with the words, "It's time they respect me again." Your voice matters more than you think. And if you find comfort here, like this video, and subscribe for more honest, heartfelt conversations like this one. Let's begin. When your children stop listening, when they roll their eyes or dismiss your words, your first instinct might be to push back. Maybe you want to remind them who you are, what you've done, what you've sacrificed. The years of guidance, sleepless nights, moments when you gave up your own needs just to meet theirs. But here's something hard and true. Raising your voice doesn't raise their respect. It often lowers it. When you try to prove your worth through frustration, it sends a message you never intended. It tells them their behavior got to you, that they have power over your emotions. And once they realize that, they may push those buttons again, not because they want to hurt you, but because it becomes a pattern, one that silences your wisdom and replaces it with emotional noise. There's a different path, quieter, but infinitely more powerful. It's the path of leading by presence, not persuasion. Think of someone who commands a room without speaking loudly. Their confidence radiates without needing validation. That's what your children need to see in you. Not someone begging to be heard, but someone who is worth listening to. One father I knew, once admired as a school principal, found himself ignored at his own dinner table. His children cut him off mid-sentence, brushed off his advice, laughed at his attempts to connect. But instead of fighting harder, he did something unexpected. He stopped arguing. He chose dignity over debate. And slowly, his silence spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. When we stop chasing approval, something beautiful happens. People start to lean in, to notice what they overlooked. It's not weakness to remain calm in the face of disrespect. It's mastery. When your children see that you won't stoop to anger or justify your worth, they start to feel the weight of your quiet strength. And that strength is what stays with them. It lingers long after the shouting fades. Your calm becomes a mirror. They see themselves reflected in your restraint. And eventually they'll recognize the gap between how they're treating you and how you carry yourself. That gap becomes the bridge they'll want to cross back to you. If this message is resonating in your heart, don't let it pass quietly. Let it echo. Leave a comment below that says, "Lead by quiet strength." Make it your personal vow, not just to your children, but to yourself. You are not forgotten. You are not powerless. Your story didn't end when theirs began. And as you continue walking this path with me, you'll discover more ways to reclaim your rightful space, not by shouting, but by simply becoming someone they cannot overlook. There's a moment in every parent's life when love turns into habit, when giving becomes automatic, not because it's asked for, but because it's expected. You've probably given so much over the years that you forgot to stop and ask, is this being appreciated, not just received, but truly seen, acknowledged, and honored? And here's the truth most won't say aloud. The more you keep giving without appreciation, the more invisible you become. That love, once vibrant and nurturing, slowly shifts into something your children might view as normal, as a constant they never need to thank, because it's always there. That's not love failing. That's boundaries fading. And when your boundaries dissolve, respect tends to go with them. We often keep giving because it's how we show love. It's what we were taught. Be selfless. Be dependable. Be there no matter what. But when you give without pause, without balance, you can unintentionally teach others that your value is tied only to what you offer. They begin to see your support not as a gift, but as a duty, something guaranteed. And when that happens, appreciation dries up. Gratitude gets replaced with expectation. And in the silence that follows, you start to wonder, when did this shift happen? When did my giving stop being noticed? But by then, you've already crossed a line. You've given too much without receiving enough in return. I knew a father once, let's call him George, who gave endlessly. Money, time, advice, favors. His children were grown, but they still relied on him for everything. Not because they couldn't do it on their own, but because they knew he would always step in. He thought he was being supportive. He thought his love was holding the family together. But then, in his time of need, when he fell ill, when he needed help, it became painfully clear no one showed up the way he had for them. It wasn't anger he felt. It was sadness, that he had confused unconditional love with unconditional access. That moment changed him, and it woke something up in him that had long been asleep. He began pulling back, not with resentment, but with self-respect. He didn't cut anyone off. He simply stopped volunteering his energy where it wasn't valued. And something shifted. Slowly but surely, his children started calling to ask how he was, not just what he could do. They began to see the depth of what he had always given, and they treated it differently, because now it had a boundary, a limit, a value. Your kindness is precious, but if you give without being cherished, it starts to feel like currency spent in a market that never pays you back. That doesn't mean you stop loving it, means you love yourself enough to be selective with your giving. If this message speaks to you, I invite you to pause, not forever, but long enough to ask yourself, am I giving too much without being appreciated? If the answer is yes, then take a breath and begin the shift. You're not withdrawing love, you're restoring balance. And in that balance, your worth will be seen again. If this part of the journey resonates with you, leave a comment below that says, my giving is a gift, not a guarantee. Because when you begin to see yourself that way, others will follow. There's a subtle shift that happens over time, one we rarely notice until it's already taken root. You begin to define yourself entirely by your role as a parent. Your time, your thoughts, your routines. They all revolve around your children, and for a while it feels right. Noble, even. But then, without warning, the world changes. Your children grow up. They build their own lives. Their calendars fill up. Their days get busier. And suddenly, without meaning to, they stop looking back. That's when the ache sets in. Not because you stopped loving, but because you forgot to keep living. You handed your joy to them, hoping they'd carry it with them. But now, you're left wondering, what about me? What? Many parents don't realize how deeply their identity has become entangled with their children's lives until that connection loosens. And when it does, the silence is deafening. You wait for calls. You linger near your phone. You fill your days with worry, not wonder. But here's the truth most won't tell you. Your children are more likely to respect you when they see you living a life of your own. A life filled with meaning, joy, curiosity, and purpose, independent of their attention. When they sense that your happiness doesn't depend on their validation, it frees them. And strangely enough, it draws them closer. Because people are naturally pulled toward strength, not need. I once met a woman named Eleanor. After her husband passed, she poured herself entirely into her adult children. She called daily. She gave advice that wasn't asked for. She waited on their visits like a lifeline. But it wasn't long before she noticed something heartbreaking. They started pulling away. Conversations became shorter. Visits less frequent. It wasn't because they didn't love her. It was because she unknowingly made them the center of her world. And that weight, even when well-intentioned, felt heavy. One day, Eleanor chose differently. She joined a book club. She started gardening. She took a trip with friends. Slowly, her joy returned. And so did her children. Not out of guilt, but out of admiration. When your children see you living, really living, something inside them shifts. They remember who you were before you became just their parent. They see your energy, your resilience, your spark. And that spark reignites their respect. Not because you asked for it, but because you embodied it. They start calling more. Asking about your life. Listening, not out of obligation, but out of genuine interest. Because now, you are more than a voice on the phone. You're a light in the world. A presence with gravity. And your story becomes something they want to be a part of again. Not something they feel responsible for carrying. If this message touches something within you, let it be your turning point. You are not a background character in their story. You are the author of your own next chapter. Begin writing it. Find something that lights you up, something just for you. And don't apologize for it. If this part of the journey speaks to your heart, drop a comment below that says, "I'm building my life again." Let it be your quiet declaration to the world. Not because you've been forgotten, but because you're finally remembering yourself. One of the most unspoken burdens in a parent's heart is the quiet hope that their children will fill the emotional gaps left by aging. The need to feel needed, loved, and remembered often becomes a silent dependency. You don't mean to lean too much. You just miss them. You miss the noise, the shared meals, the laughter. But when your emotional well-being becomes entangled in how often they call, how warmly they speak, or whether they check in at all, you unknowingly hand them the responsibility of your happiness. And even if they love you deeply, that burden becomes overwhelming. Love, when weighted by guilt, turns sour. And what was once closeness slowly becomes discomfort, or worse, avoidance. It's not about pretending you don't care. It's about learning to care differently. Emotional independence isn't cold. It's courageous. It says, "I love you deeply, but I won't lose myself waiting for your validation." When your children sense that you are grounded, centered, and emotionally whole without clinging to them, they naturally relax around you. They stop feeling like they have to perform affection, and they start offering it freely. It's a paradox. But the less you need from them emotionally, the more they feel safe coming closer. Not because they're forced to, but because they're drawn to your stability. You become a lighthouse, not a tether. I remember Helen, a soft-spoken mother, whose world revolved around her grown children. She called every few days, left long voicemails, and often reminded them how quiet her days had become. Her heart was full of love, but it came through as a subtle plea. "Please make me feel less alone." Her kids began to pull away, not because they didn't care, but because every interaction felt like emotional labor. Until one day, Helen chose something different. She stopped waiting. She joined a painting class. She walked with neighbors. She learned how to be with herself again, and something beautiful happened. Her children began reaching out on their own. They missed her not because she called, but because she stopped calling. Your joy is not a gift. Your children are meant to deliver. It's something you can create, right now, even in the smallest of moments. Morning light through your window, a good book, a walk that clears your mind. And when you start living from this quiet place of emotional freedom, your energy changes. Your conversations become lighter. Your presence becomes healing. You stop trying to be heard, and instead you become someone they want to listen to, not out of duty, but desire. And respect follows, not because you asked for it, but because you stopped needing it. And that's where true power begins. If this chapter speaks to your heart, make a quiet promise to yourself. Comment below with the words, "I am emotionally free." Let that be your sacred reminder that your worth is not tied to who calls, who visits, or who remembers. You are whole on your own. And the more whole you become, the more the world, your children included, will feel it and honor it. It happens quietly. You start making small compromises, not because you want to, but because you're hoping they'll finally see how much you care. You shift your schedule to fit theirs. You bite your tongue to avoid disagreement. You say yes, even when everything inside you screams no. And all of it is done in the quiet hope that they'll recognize your efforts and offer a bit of the old warmth, the appreciation you once knew so well. But here's a difficult truth. The more you shrink yourself for someone else's comfort, the less they respect your presence. It's not because they're cruel. It's because you're unintentionally teaching them that your needs come second and your boundaries can be bent. Respect doesn't grow from quiet sacrifice. It grows from quiet self-respect. When you start valuing your own time, your voice, your energy, something shifts. You stop needing approval and begin radiating a different energy, an energy that says, "I am enough," even without your applause. That energy is magnetic. It doesn't demand attention, it earns it. When you stop chasing approval, you create space for truth. You can speak up when something feels wrong. You can say no when your heart isn't in it. And you begin to model something powerful. Boundaries that don't scream, but speak with certainty. I once met a woman named Margaret. Fierce in her youth, unapologetic in her opinions. But with age, she softened in ways that weren't entirely healthy. She gave up her preferences to keep her children close. She stayed silent when they spoke down to her. She confused peacekeeping with love. But over time, she noticed a sad pattern. They stopped listening, stopped seeking her thoughts. She had made herself small, and in doing so, had faded from their view. One day, Margaret made a bold choice. She began standing up for herself again. She didn't yell. She didn't blame. She just started saying what she felt. And slowly, her children began to hear her again. Not out of guilt, but out of genuine respect. If your voice has been quiet for too long, it's time to let it rise, not in anger, but in truth. Speak with conviction. Let them see that you are not just their parent, you are a person with thoughts and values that deserve space. You don't have to be loud to be heard. You just have to be clear. When you stop seeking approval and start embracing your own truth, the world, especially your children, begins to take notice. Because you become a reflection of what they're still learning to become: whole, strong, and unapologetically real. If you're nodding right now, if something in you is saying, "This is me," then let this be your turning point. Drop a comment below with the words, "I choose self-respect." Let it echo through this moment, as a vow to yourself, not to demand more from others, but to finally give more to yourself. And in that quiet gift of self-honor, respect will come, not because you chased it, but because you became someone who commands it naturally. One of the most powerful, yet overlooked reasons respect fades in family relationships is not because love disappears, but because boundaries were never clearly defined. Or if they were, they slowly eroded over time. When you allow someone, especially your children, to speak to you with sarcasm, to dismiss your words, to ignore your needs, you may think you're keeping the peace. But what you're really doing is slowly teaching them how to treat you. Not through what you say, but through what you tolerate. Respect is not lost in one moment. It erodes over many small ones. The moments you swallow your feelings, brush things off, and tell yourself, "It's not worth the fight." But here's the truth. If you don't define your own limits, no one else will. Boundaries aren't walls. They're not punishments or ultimatums. They're invitations, clear lines that say, "This is where I stand, and I invite you to meet me here with respect." Without follow-through, boundaries are just suggestion. But when they're upheld with calm certainty, they transform relationships. I knew a man named Robert. Strong in business, but silent at home. His adult children mocked his routines, laughed off his wisdom, interrupted his stories. For years, he let it slide. Until one day, something in him shifted. He didn't explode or retreat. He simply said, "I'll continue when you're ready to listen." And then he meant it. His presence became conditional, not on love, but on respect. And slowly, his family adjusted, not because he forced them, but because he changed the terms of the relationship. You don't have to beg for better treatment. You don't have to issue threats. But you do have to decide, right here, right now, what you're no longer willing to allow. If your presence is met with disrespect, you have the right to leave the conversation. If your voice is dismissed, you have the right to withhold your energy until it's heard with care. And when you enforce those boundaries, not with anger, but with unshakable dignity, something profound happens. People begin to change, not because they have to, but because they want to. Because they begin to realize that access to your heart is a privilege, not an obligation. So what's the truth behind all of this? It's not about controlling your children. It's not even about making them love you more. It's about stepping back into the fullness of your own worth. Because when you stand in your own light, when you stop overgiving, stop chasing, stop hoping they'll change, you become impossible to ignore. You stop being someone waiting in the background of their lives, and you start becoming someone they admire again. Not because of what you do for them, but because of who you are. Quiet, grounded, respected, complete. If these words found a home in your heart, I invite you to leave a comment below with the words, "I'm ready to regain respect." That single sentence could be the beginning of your next chapter, and it might just give someone else the courage to start theirs. If this video brought you peace, hope, or clarity, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell icon so you never miss another moment of wisdom. And if you'd like to help us keep creating these heartfelt messages for those who need them most, you can click the super thanks button below. Until next time, remember this: you are not invisible. You are not past your purpose. You are worthy of respect, and your best season might just be about to begin.